Imagine working for a decade, saving every penny, finally buying your dream home, only to have your parents show up demanding you hand over the keys to your unemployed younger brother because, quote, he deserves it more. Quick note before we begin. This is a fictional, dramatized story for education and entertainment. Any resemblance to real people is coincidental. This story is inspired by common HOA situations people talk about online. All names and details here are fictional. Jessica Morgan was 34 when this nightmare began, a software engineer who'd spent 10 years climbing the corporate ladder while living in a cramped studio apartment, watching every dollar, skipping vacations her coworkers took, saying no to brunches and girls' trips, all for one singular goal: to own a home that was completely, undeniably hers. Growing up, Jessica had always been the invisible child, the one who got straight A's but never quite earned the praise that her younger brother Ryan received for simply showing up, the one who paid her own way through college while Ryan's tuition, housing, and spending money flowed freely from their parents' wallets, the one who learned early that love in the Morgan household was conditional and hierarchical. When Jessica finally closed on her house at 32, a beautiful 3-bedroom craftsman-style home in a quiet neighborhood with a garden she'd dreamed of tending, she felt for the first time in her life that she'd achieved something her parents couldn't diminish or take credit for, something that proved her worth wasn't measured by their approval. She didn't invite them to the housewarming, didn't post about it on social media, simply sent a brief text with a photo and moved on with her life, pouring her energy into making the space truly hers, painting the walls in calming blues and greens, installing smart home features she'd researched obsessively, creating a home office that felt both professional and peaceful. For 2 years, Jessica lived in quiet contentment, her relationship with her parents maintaining its usual distant cordiality of obligatory holiday dinners and brief phone calls, until the day her mother called with a request that would shatter everything. Linda Morgan's voice on the phone had that particular tone Jessica recognized from childhood, the one that wasn't really asking but demanding disguised as sweetness, and she opened with how proud they were of Jessica's success before pivoting to the real reason for the call. Ryan, now 29, had been going through a tough time. Apparently Ryan's startup had failed, which wasn't surprising given he'd launched it with zero business plan and their parents' money, and he'd been living in their basement for 8 months, apparently struggling with depression, and they felt he needed a fresh start, a place of his own to rebuild his confidence and get back on his feet. Jessica felt the familiar sinking sensation in her stomach, already knowing where this was headed but hoping desperately she was wrong, when her mother delivered the bombshell. They thought it would be perfect if Jessica let Ryan live in her house, rent-free of course since he was family and struggling, and Jessica could move back into her old childhood bedroom temporarily to give him space to heal. The audacity of it hit Jessica like a physical blow, the assumption that her home, her sanctuary, the thing she'd sacrificed years to achieve, was somehow communal family property to be redistributed according to their golden child's needs, and she managed to say no, firmly but politely, explaining she had a life, a career, a home she'd worked hard for, and that Ryan needed to figure out his own path. Her mother's voice turned cold immediately, that warmth evaporating like it had never existed, saying Jessica was being selfish, that family helps family, that Ryan had always been more sensitive and needed more support, and didn't Jessica care about her own brother's mental health? Jessica held firm, ended the call, and tried to return to normal life. But 3 days later her father showed up at her door unannounced. Robert Morgan didn't do subtle, standing on her porch with his arms crossed, and that expression Jessica remembered from every childhood disappointment, and he got straight to the point. Jessica was going to let Ryan have the house, not as a temporary arrangement but permanently, because Ryan needed stability and Jessica was perfectly capable of starting over. She'd done it once and could do it again. Jessica actually laughed, a shocked bitter sound, asking if he was serious, and her father's face hardened, saying he was completely serious, that they'd given her life, raised her, and she owed them this. The argument that followed was years of resentment finally erupting, Jessica pointing out she'd put herself through school, bought this house with her own money, that Ryan had been handed everything and squandered it all while she'd fought for every opportunity, and her father's response was chilling. Family takes care of family, and if she refused, they'd find another way. Jessica slammed the door, hands shaking, assuming it was an empty threat born of frustration. But her parents weren't done, not by a long shot. 2 weeks later, Jessica received an overnight certified letter from a law firm she'd never heard of. and inside was a lawsuit claiming that her parents had provided substantial financial assistance toward her down payment and were now calling in that loan, demanding either immediate repayment of $85,000 or transfer of the property title to satisfy the debt. Jessica stared at the documents in disbelief, rage coursing through her veins, because it was an absolute lie. She'd saved every penny herself, had bank statements and documentation proving it, had specifically not accepted money from her parents because she'd known strings would be attached. She called her mother immediately, voice shaking with anger, demanding to know what they were doing, and Linda's response was calm, almost pleasant, saying they were simply correcting a family matter, that they'd loaned her the money years ago informally and now needed it back for Ryan's future. And if Jessica just signed over the house quietly, they'd drop the whole thing and everyone could move forward. The manipulation was breathtaking, the sheer fabrication of a debt that never existed. And Jessica realized with horror that her parents had actually consulted an attorney and filed legal documents based on complete fiction, gambling that she'd cave rather than fight. Let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. If you're finding value in this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you've ever experienced a similar HOA or neighborhood situation, feel free to share your story in the comments. Jessica immediately contacted her own attorney, Margaret Chen, a sharp property lawyer her best friend Amanda had recommended, and Margaret's assessment was both reassuring and infuriating. The lawsuit was frivolous, built on fabricated claims without evidence, but fighting it would still cost money, time, and emotional energy, which was exactly what Jessica's parents were counting on. Margaret requested all of Jessica's financial records, bank statements from the past decade, mortgage documents, anything proving she'd funded the purchase independently, and Jessica spent a weekend pulling together years of documentation, each bank statement a reminder of the sacrifices she'd made, the months of rice and beans, the second-hand furniture, the skipped social events. The evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable, showing systematic saving from her own paychecks, no large deposits from her parents, nothing that could remotely support their claim, and Margaret filed a motion to dismiss with prejudice, including a counterclaim for attorney's fees and sanctions for filing a frivolous lawsuit. But Jessica's parents escalated instead of backing down, and Ryan himself showed up at her workplace, causing a scene in the lobby, loudly accusing Jessica of abandoning family, calling her a selfish corporate sellout who'd forgotten where she came from, until security had to escort him out while Jessica stood there mortified in front of colleagues and clients. The harassment continued, her mother leaving voicemails dripping with guilt and manipulation, alternating between sweet appeals to family loyalty and vicious accusations that Jessica had always been cold and ungrateful. Her father sending emails with subject lines like "last chance to do the right thing," and Ryan posting vague social media rants about toxic family members who value money over blood. Jessica documented everything, every call, every email, every public incident, building a case not just for the lawsuit's dismissal but for a harassment restraining order, because what had started as an entitled demand had evolved into a coordinated campaign of intimidation. The court date arrived 4 months after that initial letter, and Jessica walked into the courthouse with Margaret, armed with bankers' boxes of documentation, while her parents arrived with their attorney looking confident, apparently believing their parental authority would somehow trump objective reality. The hearing was brutal, Margaret systematically dismantling every claim, presenting bank statements showing Jessica's independent saving pattern, testimony from her mortgage broker confirming no parental co-signing or gift letters, even Jessica's old landlords confirming her frugal lifestyle during the saving years. And when the opposing attorney tried to claim verbal agreements and family understandings, Margaret produced Jessica's text messages from the home purchase period, showing she'd explicitly declined her parents' offer of a small gift to avoid exactly this type of entanglement. The judge was not impressed, his expression growing increasingly stern as the fabricated nature of the lawsuit became undeniable, and when Jessica's father tried to interrupt from the gallery, claiming Jessica was lying, the judge threatened him with contempt, saying this was a courtroom, not a family therapy session. The ruling came swift and decisive. Lawsuit dismissed with prejudice, meaning it could never be refiled. Jessica awarded full attorney's fees of $17,000, and the judge issued a strongly worded rebuke about misusing the court system for family disputes and fabricating financial claims. Jessica felt vindicated but emotionally devastated, the legal victory hollow against the reality that her parents had been willing to lie under oath, commit potential fraud, and publicly humiliate her to give her brother a house he hadn't earned. But the most shocking moment came after the hearing in the courthouse hallway, when Ryan approached Jessica alone while their parents spoke with their attorney, and instead of apologizing or showing remorse, he looked her in the eye and said he never even wanted her house. Their parents had pushed the whole thing. He'd been fine in the basement, but now everyone would blame him anyway, so thanks for ruining everything. The revelation that Ryan had been a pawn in their parents' narcissistic game, that they'd weaponized both children in service of their own twisted family hierarchy, left Jessica speechless. But Ryan walked away before she could respond, leaving her standing there processing the dysfunction that had poisoned their entire lives. Jessica obtained a restraining order the following week, legally prohibiting all 3 family members from contacting her or coming within 500 feet of her home, and when her mother violated it twice, leaving letters in Jessica's mailbox claiming she was tearing the family apart, Jessica reported it immediately and her mother faced legal consequences that finally ended the harassment. The attorney's fees took 6 months to collect, her parents fighting the payment through every legal avenue until their own lawyer apparently advised them they'd lose more fighting than paying, and when the check finally arrived, Jessica donated every penny to a non-profit supporting first-generation homebuyers, wanting no financial connection to them whatsoever. Jessica's house remained hers, the title unchallenged, the mortgage in her name alone, but the emotional cost was incalculable. Holidays spent alone, a family permanently fractured, the loss of even the illusion that her parents might someday see her as valuable as her brother. She threw herself into therapy, working through decades of favoritism and conditional love, learning to separate her worth from their approval, building chosen family with friends like Amanda who showed her what real support looked like. A year later, Jessica planted a garden in her backyard, something she'd always planned but delayed, filling it with vegetables and flowers she tended each morning before work, finding peace in creating something beautiful that was entirely hers, answerable to no one's expectations but her own. She occasionally wondered about Ryan, whether he'd ever escaped their parents' manipulation or remained trapped in the golden child role that had stunted his growth, but she didn't reach out, recognizing that healing required distance from the entire toxic system. Jessica's story isn't about winning a lawsuit. It's about recognizing that family doesn't mean unlimited access to your life, your resources, or your peace. And sometimes protecting yourself means accepting that the people who raised you may never respect the person you've become. The house still stands, a testament not just to Jessica's financial discipline but to her refusal to be diminished, to be guilted into sacrificing her dreams for someone else's entitlement, to accept that her value could be measured by her utility to people who never truly saw her. And every time Jessica turns the key in her front door, she remembers that she earned this, she fought for it, and no one, not family, not lawsuits, not years of manipulation, could take it away from her because it was never theirs to claim. If Jessica Morgan's battle to protect the home she worked a decade to earn taught you something about setting boundaries with entitled family members, please hit that like button right now. Every like helps us reach more people who are struggling with toxic family dynamics and need to hear they're not alone. And if you haven't subscribed yet, click that subscribe button and turn on notifications because we share new property rights and family boundary stories every week that could give you the courage to stand up for yourself. This story shows why documentation matters, why saying no to family manipulation is necessary for survival, and why your achievements don't become communal property just because you share DNA. And your support through likes and subscriptions helps us continue bringing you these real-world lessons that empower people to protect what's theirs. Take just 2 seconds to like and subscribe before you go. We appreciate every single one of you who's navigating difficult family situations and refusing to be guilted into submission. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.